So at this point, you should be familiar with the process of photosynthesis and what a plant needs to do photosynthesis and what a plant gives off to do photosynthesis. So we know that a plant needs sunlight, it needs water, and it takes in carbon dioxide, and then it gives off glucose, which is the food for the plant, and it also gives off oxygen that we in turn take in and breathe. So here's another way of looking at it. So photosynthesis, what is it? It's the process that a plant uses to make its own food. The chemical term that we use is called glucose, and that os represents sugar. So it is producing the sugar called glucose, and that is the food for the plant. We know that this takes place in the chloroplast of a plant cell. And this is another reason why we talked about how important water is in a cell. This is another reason why water is so important in a cell, because plants have to have water in order to do photosynthesis. This might look confusing, but it really isn't. When you look at it, you know that CO2 means carbon dioxide. You know that H2O is water. So when you see these sixes in front, that just means 6 carbon dioxide molecules plus 6 water molecules plus light energy makes this C6H12O6. That is the chemical formula for glucose, so that's the food, plus 6 oxygen molecules. And I have below here in red the words so that you can understand what all of these things are. So this is the chemical formula of photosynthesis. So we have this other process called cellular respiration. And I want to make sure that you understand that word respiration. A lot of times we think breathing, but this is not breathing. This is not what we do in our bodies to breathe. This is what each individual cell is doing to produce energy. So since animal cells can't do photosynthesis, they can't make their own food, instead we put food into our bodies and in turn into our cells. So once we have the food and the food is broken down, the glucose is broken down, what cellular respiration is going to do, it's going to take that food molecule, that glucose, it's going to break it down and turn it in to energy for the cell. And as we've already learned, that energy form is called ATP. So it's going to turn the food into ATP, which is the format of energy that a cell needs to be able to do all sorts of things. Something that's important is that cells have to have oxygen in order to do cellular respiration. So that's kind of where the respire parts comes into it. We have to have oxygen in order for this process to take place. The process takes place in the mitochondria of the cells, and that makes sense because we've learned that the mitochondria is the powerhouse, or it's where the energy is produced, and that is exactly what cellular respiration is. We're producing energy. All cells do this, not just animal cells. So plant cells also do this, but they make the glucose first, and then they take the glucose and break it down and turn it into energy. Whereas for animal cells, we put the food into our cells and then break it down. Here is the cellular respiration equation. And if you look at it closely enough, you might actually see that the photosynthesis and the cellular respiration equation are pretty much opposites, because here we start with glucose, we add oxygen to it, and then we break it down and we turn it into carbon dioxide, which we know that our bodies and our cells give off. It actually produces a little bit of water in our cells, and then there's the energy, the ATP, that our cells are trying to produce so that the cell has energy to use for various activities. So this is a nice chart that kind of is able to compare and contrast these two processes. They're similar. Again, I told you they're almost exactly opposites of each other. So sometimes it's hard to keep them straight. So this chart might give you a little bit of insight into similarities and differences. I hope this helps you to understand photosynthesis and cellular respiration.